The woman I met at the group blind date was a doctor, someone everyone expected to excel in her field. Yet, despite her impressive qualifications, she appeared inexperienced and unsure of herself. In moments that required quick decisions, she seemed to freeze. As a fellow doctor, I felt a strong urge to step in and assist her, ensuring she wouldn't let her friends down. I'm Jack, 32, and also a doctor. Despite my age, I've managed to stay out of the gossip circles. My focus has always been on my work, which has led to several breakups as my relationships faltered due to my lack of attention. By my late 20s, it became clear that my true passion lay in my career rather than in romance. I used to feel a pang of emptiness watching others settle down with families, but now I've come to terms with it. My priority is saving lives, and my laid-back family back home doesn't pressure me about marriage. I'm grateful for my career and the chance to become self-sufficient. So when an old high school buddy invited me to a mixer, I wasn't thrilled. I planned to decline, but they were short a person and really needed me. Reluctantly, I agreed. My strategy was simple: make a brief appearance and then leave. I didn't bother dressing up, heading to the meetup spot in a casual outfit. "Hey everyone, long time no see," I greeted as I arrived, noticing I was the last one there. Seeing old friends after so many years put a genuine smile on my face. Life had pulled us in different directions, so reuniting at this group date was a pleasant surprise. Even though I'd been hesitant, that moment of reconnection made me glad I came. We reminisced about old times and shared updates on our way to the restaurant, and for a while, it felt like we were back in college. I was enjoying myself so much that I almost forgot the initial purpose of the evening. We settled into our seats and waited a few minutes for the women to arrive. As soon as they walked in, the atmosphere brightened. They were cheerful and introduced themselves with friendly "nice to meet yous." I could see my friends silently hoping for a meaningful connection as we entered the restaurant, and I found myself quietly rooting for them as well. After ordering drinks and making a toast, we began introducing ourselves. "I'm Jack. I work in corporate," I said. I had coordinated with my friends beforehand to give a different profession. It's not that I'm embarrassed to be a doctor, but the topic often leads to a lot of questions and can be a bit overwhelming. "Hi, I'm Sarah. I work as an internal medicine doctor." I was surprised to learn that there was another doctor among us. The seemingly reserved woman ordered a non-alcoholic drink and had her cell phone face up on the table. I also kept my phone visible, always on alert for emergency calls, so I could tell that Sarah wasn't lying about her profession. While my friends would occasionally nudge me to come on, have a drink for once, I just smiled and brushed it off. Once Sarah mentioned her profession, she became the center of attention and was quickly bombarded with questions. "I'm just a nervous doctor in name only," she said, looking modest or perhaps a bit apologetic. Despite her own humility, Sarah's friends seemed genuinely proud to have a doctor in their group, much like parents bragging about their child's achievements. "I'm a doctor too, but I don't yet feel confident in my abilities, so I often avoid mentioning it in front of strangers," Sarah admitted. Her honest and straightforward demeanor was endearing. Watching her receive praise from her friends while responding with a troubled smile made me feel a bit sympathetic. My friends seemed increasingly interested in Sarah, their eyes frequently drifting toward her. She was undeniably beautiful, kind, and had a delicate charm that made her even more appealing, and her humble attitude likely added to her likability. I wasn't romantically attracted to Sarah, but I felt a sense of camaraderie with her as a fellow doctor. Many female doctors at my workplace were strong-willed, often carrying a high society vibe that came across as snobbish. My background is different. I attended a state university in Idaho, while my current hospital is affiliated with a prestigious private medical college. I often found myself feeling out of place among the younger, more elite female doctors whose values seemed at odds with my own. Coming from an average family, I struggled to connect with them. But with Sarah, there was no hint of that elitist attitude. As the evening progressed and the drinks flowed, the mood in the bar suddenly changed. "Sir, are you okay?" The distress call from the store clerk drew my attention to a man who had collapsed just outside the door. I immediately stood up and rushed over. Identifying myself as a doctor, I quickly assessed him and diagnosed acute alcohol poisoning. I instructed the clerk to call an ambulance. Sarah, pushed forward by our mixer friends, approached us with a look of visible distress. She was clearly unsettled, her hands trembling as she hesitated and appeared on the brink of panic. "It's okay. I said gently, trying to calm her. I'm an emergency doctor. I've handled situations like this before. Stay calm. Let's start by getting him into a more comfortable position. I spoke softly to her. Though surprised, Sarah nodded and followed my instructions, helping me turn the man onto his side and ensuring his clothing wasn't constricting him. I asked the clerk for a blanket to keep him warm. Fortunately, he was still breathing. With basic first aid in place, we waited for the ambulance to arrive. No matter how often you deal with emergencies, you never quite get used to them. Thankfully, this one wasn't as serious as it could have been. Looking down with regret, Sarah said softly, "I couldn't do anything," as tears streamed down her cheeks. Earlier at the mixer, she had mentioned working at a big city hospital. Given her age, it was clear she had limited experience despite graduating at the top of her class. It seemed everyone had high expectations of her because of her impressive background. She had shared with us, struggling, "I can't let everyone down. It's one thing to save lives, but the pressure to constantly meet others' expectations is overwhelming." I understood that it wasn't entirely Sarah's fault she felt this way. I don't care much about titles and rarely discuss my profession. As a result, people often forget I'm a doctor, and I've heard rude comparisons between me and Sarah. But seeing her cry from frustration touched me deeply. I remembered my own struggles and knew firsthand how painful such regret could be. "Sarah, you really did something remarkable," I said after the man was taken away in an ambulance. Sarah hesitantly began to speak with her friends who had rushed over. "I didn't really. Thanks to your precise instructions, he was saved," she started to say. As she was about to downplay her role, I interrupted her. I met Sarah's surprised gaze. Her friends were praising her, saying, "You did great." Sarah looked at me with a question in her eyes, though I figured she just didn't want to disappoint them. I noticed a medical reference book peeking out of her bag, despite being a newly published edition. It was already tattered and covered in sticky notes. It was clear she was putting in a tremendous amount of effort. Maybe it's just me being idealistic, but I believe hard work is always rewarded. I hoped she wouldn't get disheartened. There would be many more challenges ahead, but I wanted her to know she didn't need to carry the guilt of letting anyone down. The mixer wrapped up after the incidents during the first round, and I was relieved not to have to come up with an excuse for skipping the second round. As I was about to head home, my mind preoccupied with other things, Sarah, looking a bit shy, approached me and said, "Jack, please wait." When I asked her what was up, she bowed slightly and thanked me. "Would you mind sharing your contact information? I'd like to stay connected, both as friends and fellow doctors." She held out her phone with an expectant look, and I found her endearing. "Here's my number." "Thank you," I said, handing her my contact details. She registered it with a happy smile and waved as she went back to her group of friends. They were planning a sleepover and mentioned going out for some shopping. My buddies and I decided to hit a bar we knew for another drink. As the usual non-drinker, I stayed sober and stared at my phone screen. I received a message from Sarah that simply read, "Thank you." I replied with a brief, "You're welcome," and hit send. It seems Sarah wasn't much of a communicator either, and that was the end of our exchange for the moment. In the following weeks, we exchanged messages a few times, sharing small observations like how beautiful the sky looked or updates on a flower she was growing. Our conversations never led to concrete plans but consisted of random thoughts, forming a surprisingly comfortable bond. Despite our busy schedules and the need for practice and experience, these small exchanges were a source of comfort. I looked forward to her messages, whether they were simple encouragements like "let's keep it up" or "good job today." I realized I had feelings for Sarah 6 months after we first met. Her dedication to her work was evident. She was always studying and attending various trainings to become a doctor capable of saving lives in any situation. While I had my busy days juggling work and studies, I made sure to get enough sleep and take breaks when needed. Sarah, on the other hand, was relentless, rarely allowing herself time to rest. When she called to share her latest learnings, I was genuinely impressed and wanted to support her. "It's tough, but it's fun. I feel like I'm finally on my path and want to improve every day," she said, laughing as she spoke. I was sure of my feelings for her. It took me some time to recognize them. But once I did, I decided to ask Sarah out. "Sarah, when's your next day off?" "Next Thursday," she replied. Our days off matched, so I smoothly suggested a date. She happily accepted, and I began planning it. Despite our frequent messages and calls, we hadn't met since our initial encounter. For our second meeting, I planned to confess my feelings. I knew our busy schedules made it uncertain when we could meet next, so I wanted to make this day special. That night, while on duty, an emergency case came in. I quickly assessed the situation, directing the nurse and rushing to the emergency entrance. The ambulance arrived, and as the doors opened, I was shocked to see Sarah on the stretcher, her white knit stained with blood. A man in his 30s had been in a severe motorcycle accident, unconscious and in critical condition. We immediately administered CPR and controlled the bleeding while pushing the stretcher together. Sarah, despite her own critical condition, explained the situation and the actions taken. "I understand. I'll handle it from here," I said, stepping into the treatment room and quickly getting to work. I focused on cleaning and stitching the wound with precision, making sure there was no damage to the brain. Once the immediate care was complete, I reached out to contact the patient's family. I finished the treatment, grateful for the excellent first aid Sarah had provided. The injuries were serious but no longer life-threatening, thanks to her quick response. When I stepped out of the treatment room, I found Sarah waiting anxiously. "The first aid you administered was perfect and made a huge difference. The patient is out of danger now," I said, bowing my head slightly in appreciation. Sarah's tense posture softened, and she slumped down in relief, tears streaming as she whispered, "I'm so glad." She explained how she had encountered an accident outside a supermarket after her shift. At first, she felt paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. But before she knew it, her instincts took over, and she jumped into action. Despite her fear, she kept reminding herself why she had trained so hard, and it took tremendous courage for her to step forward and identify herself as a doctor. She admitted that if she hadn't, there might not have been anyone else to help. "I know how hard you've worked, Sarah. You did really well," I said, gently patting her head in comfort. She nodded, still crying but clearly relieved. "Sarah, it's getting late, but I'm almost done here. How about we grab something to eat? There's a diner nearby that stays open all night," I suggested, offering to take her out for a meal. "I'd love that. Honestly, I haven't even had dinner yet," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with a mix of relief and embarrassment as she held her stomach. She mentioned she needed to change out of her blood-stained sweater and quickly grabbed a bag with spare clothes, heading for the restroom. As I watched her dash off, I couldn't help but notice how much more confident she seemed compared to when we first met. The nervousness she once had about living up to others' expectations seemed to be fading as she grew into her role as a doctor. Smiling, I gave her a thumbs up as she disappeared from sight, feeling proud of the progress she was making. After wrapping up work, I found Sarah waiting in the lobby, and together we headed to a nearby diner. We took our seats, and I ordered grilled chicken while Sarah went for steak and potatoes. As the food arrived, Sarah's eyes lit up, and she dug in with enthusiasm. "This place is amazing," she said, her voice filled with delight. Seeing her so happy, I felt relieved that I had chosen the right spot. Then, before I even realized what I was doing, the words slipped out. "Sarah, I like you." She froze mid-bite, clearly surprised by the sudden confession. I hadn't planned on confessing like this. Originally, I was going to wait for our planned date, where the setting would be perfect. But now that it was out there was no turning back. I had to be honest about my feelings. "I admire your dedication, the way you pour everything into your work and your goals. I treasure our casual texts and those random phone calls. They mean a lot to me. Sarah, your hard work has been a source of strength for me too." Sarah blushed, looking down at her plate. I could see the surprise and emotion in her eyes as she processed my words. Gathering my courage, I stood up and reached out my hand. "This is only our second time meeting. Would you like to date me?" Hesitantly, Sarah took my hand. "I've managed to keep going because of you, Jack. That day when I felt so helpless, you were there to support me, and I didn't let my friend down because of it. I was relieved but also felt so small. But I pushed through, and it was because of you, even if I can't express it well." She squeezed my hand tighter, her grip conveying the depth of her feelings. "No words were really needed," I said softly. "I could feel it. So I like you too, Sarah. If you're okay with someone like me, I'd be honored." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes filled with warmth. "I'd be grateful too, Jack," she whispered, her voice full of sincerity. We stood there, hand in hand, knowing that this was the start of something special. Her humble attitude, unchanged since the day we met, is quintessentially Sarah. With each passing moment, my affection for her deepens, and just like that, during our second meal together, our relationship began. Despite the demands of our careers, we found time for each other, going on countless dates. Sarah, always striving for more experience and knowledge, pushed herself harder every day. Inspired by her relentless drive, I began attending more training sessions and dedicated myself to studying every day. I had been worried that, like in my past relationships, my busy schedule might make her feel lonely. But to my surprise, Sarah wasn't the type to feel neglected easily. Our relationship has remained smooth and strong for 2 years now. Even with our hectic lives, Sarah has always been by my side. The confession I had carefully planned that day didn't go as intended, but in the end, we fell deeply in love with each other. Now Sarah and I are married and living together. To add even more joy to our lives, Sarah is expecting a child. As we look toward our future, our shared passion for our careers continues to drive us. We push and inspire each other every day. After her maternity leave, Sarah is even considering switching from internal medicine to emergency medicine, a decision that reflects her ever-growing ambition. I used to think I wasn't cut out for love, immersing myself in work as a way to avoid it. But meeting Sarah, someone with whom I can share happiness and grow together, feels like the greatest blessing in my life. I'm determined to work hard to protect this happiness, and I look forward to the future we will build together.